Okay. Were you resentful of the war effort because of the internment camp, or were you supportive? Like, how did you feel towards America after they put you in the camp?
Oh, not at all. I mean, we're American citizens, and we were very supportive of the war effort. Even my dad, as an immigrant from Japan, wanted to do something to help in the war effort, and he ended up teaching at the University of Chicago during World War II under something called ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, where he was teaching Japanese to U.S. Army personnel. Now, he left Heart Mountain in April of 1943 to go to Chicago to teach. So he had asked the Army for permission for my mother and me to leave as well, and the Army said no. So he came out on his own, and my mother and I stayed behind. And then by, I think it was the latter part of November of 1943, then the Army said, okay, you can leave to go to Chicago. So my mother and I then went to Chicago. But, you know, here was an immigrant. The Oriental Exclusion Act of 1924 said that Asians could not become citizens. They couldn't own land. Well, the federal law didn't say that, but California law said if you can't become a citizen of the United States, you can't own land. So that alien land law, a similar law was passed in Oregon and Washington as well. So there were laws that were very discriminatory against Asians in general. But again, this is the Empire of Japan attacking the United States of America. And everyone was supportive of helping in the war effort, including my dad, who ended up teaching at the University of Chicago. But again, it was, and then when the Army decided to form a military unit made up of Japanese Americans, it was called the Full 42nd Regimental Combat Team. And they said, you know, we need 3,000 to form this regimental combat team. They had over 10,000 people volunteer to become members of the Full 42nd. And by the end of World War II, they were the most highly decorated unit of its size in Army history. And to this day, the Full 42nd Regimental Combat Team still holds that title. Many others went into the military intelligence service to be interpreters and translators during World War II in the South Pacific, including my brother. And in fact, I used to share a bedroom with my dad and my brother, and he was 8 years older than I was. And in April of 42, I saw him crying. I said, "Hal, what's the matter?" And he said, "Well, here's my draft card, 1A, fit and able to serve. And I just got a new one. It says 4C. So I said, "Well, what's 4C?" And he found out that day that that meant enemy alien. So here was a kid born and raised San Jose, California, but the draft board just declared all draft age eligible Japanese American males as enemy aliens. So again, these were the kinds of things that were being directed against those of Japanese ancestry, just as the evacuation came about because people couldn't make the distinction between those who were flying the airplanes that bombed Pearl Harbor and people who look like them living in Washington, Oregon, and California, who by accident of birth were of Japanese ancestry. And it was General DeWitt Clinton, General Clinton, who said it was once a Jap, always a Jap. So he considered all of us, regardless of our citizenship or our allegiance, our loyalty, as not U.S. citizens, and so we were all evacuated and interned in camps for the duration of World War II. So the intensity of loyalty, I think, shown by those of, of Japanese ancestry at the time, proved in the long run that we were loyal and patriotic to the United States of America.
And what was your reaction to the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, I don't think that reaction was any different than any other American. The intensity of the war, knowing that invading Japan would be would entail a large cost of lives, and I think the military and the decision made by President Truman and those who were in charge at the time, I think, was a justified approach. And just recently, my wife and I visited both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, saw the devastation that occurred then, the rebuilding of Japan, or the Hiroshima area, the Nagasaki area. So again, it's a tragedy of war, but it's also a beacon to make sure that we don't do that in the future, or any country, that any country should not undertake nuclear weaponry as a way of fighting.
And how did you feel when you heard that the war had ended?
Well, very, very pleased. And both, of course, VE Day came first, and then VJ Day, and that also prompted my dad to say, well, now that the war is over, let's go back to California if we can. California was opened up to Japanese Americans to come back. It was after, well, actually, the opening of California, or the West Coast, for Japanese Americans to return occurred before VJ Day. But again, the intense feelings were such that nobody was really willing to go back in August or September of 1945. In our case, the last graduating class at the University of Chicago, where my dad was teaching, was going to be in April. And that class had already started. And but he asked the director of the school whether or not he would be able to leave in the November time frame of 1945. And so he said, Dr. Gulick told my dad, you can go back. So we came back to San Jose, and in fact, the day we came back into our home was Thanksgiving Day, 1945. It was just a great feeling to be able to be back in our own home, back into my own bedroom, and so it was terrific.
And was your family house, was it vandalized in any way, or was it just the same? Did anybody take care of it while you were gone?
Yes, when we left, we rented our home to a professor at San Jose State College. So she took great care of the house and the garden. My dad had a beautiful, he loved gardening. He was an insurance agent by profession, but he loved gardening, and so Dr. Lawson and her mother kept great care of the garden and the house. So we were able to move back, as I said, on Thanksgiving Day, 1940, 1945. I mentioned earlier the alien land law. Now, my dad, being an alien, could not own land. But our attorney, Mr. Peckham, recognizing that the alien land law existed, so when my dad bought the land to build the house, Mr. Peckham kept the land in his name, and my dad made the mortgage payments on the land and the house. And I remember on Saturdays going down to Parton Savings and Loan, and he'd pay his, I don't know, $43 a week or whatever it was, and they'd have this little passbook, and they'd make an entry in there of how much he had paid and how much was interest and how much went towards the principal. And he had a 10-year loan and had it paid off by 1938. But Mr. Peckham did this not only for my dad, because if you looked at the property rolls for Santa Clara County, San Benito County, Santa Cruz County, you'd see J.B. Peckham, J.B. Peckham, J.B. Peckham, all over the place. And you think, wow, this guy's really a rich guy. He's got all this land. But what he was doing was holding it for Chinese, Filipino, and Japanese people